The galaxy was a place of endless voices. Civilizations rose and fell like waves against a shore. Empires claimed stars, built their monuments in the sky, and collapsed into dust. But through all this, one voice remained quiet, small, almost forgotten. The voice of humanity. To many, humans were latecomers to the cosmic stage. They were fragile, living on a single small blue planet at the edge of a spiral arm. They had no ancient bloodlines, no sacred relics, no sprawling empire to boast of. They were simply there, tiny and unimportant in the eyes of giants. But whispers had always followed them. Rumors carried by merchants and scouts who crossed the black seas of space. Stories of how humans survived worlds that killed others. How they rebuilt after disasters that would have broken stronger species. How they turned weakness into stubbornness and stubbornness into survival. The galaxy dismissed these whispers as myths, until the alien coalition decided to test them. The coalition was not one empire, but many. They were predators bound together by greed and fear. The Veil with their insect fleets, the Sarathi, who built ships like living beasts, the Ulvari, who believed only the strong had the right to exist. For centuries they had spread, swallowing system after system. Together their fleets were unmatched. Hundreds of thousands of warships stretched across the stars, leaving nothing behind but silence. And now their gaze had turned to Earth. At first, the news of the coalition's approach spread like wildfire through the human colonies. Panic shook stations and fear flooded the airwaves. Families argued whether to flee or to fight. Governments begged for time, for peace, but the aliens offered none. They sent only one message to humanity: surrender or die. On Earth itself, the mood was heavy, like storm clouds pressing down on every heart. People looked to the night sky and imagined the swarm of warships coming closer with every passing day. Farmers in their fields, children in their schools, workers in their factories, all felt the shadow looming over them. For the first time in generations, humanity stood united not by hope of progress, but by fear of extinction. Yet even in fear, a fire grew. Deep in hidden shipyards, humanity had prepared. Not for conquest, not for domination, but for survival. They had learned long ago that they could not match alien empires in numbers, nor in elegance, nor in tradition. So they built differently. They built ships that carried entire cities inside them. Ships that could hold thousands of fighters, millions of tons of steel, and the will of a desperate people. They called them the Defiant class carriers. Each carrier was a fortress, vast and unyielding. They were not beautiful. Their armor was thick and scarred from endless testing. Their engines burned too bright. Their hulls groaned like mountains under strain, but they were alive with purpose. To the humans who built them, each carrier was more than metal. It was a promise that they would not kneel quietly, a promise that even if their world burned, the carriers would take the fight into the stars. When word spread that the Defiant class would launch, hope sparked where fear had ruled. Children painted their names on the sides of fighters. Old veterans came out of retirement to serve once more. Engineers worked until their hands bled, knowing every bolt they tightened could mean another life saved. Even in the darkest nights, when the sound of distant thunder made them think of alien cannons, people whispered to each other, "The carriers are coming. We are not helpless. We will stand." And so, as the alien coalition gathered its armada at the edges of human space, humanity prepared, not with ancient wisdom, not with numbers that could rival the stars, but with something far simpler. They prepared with defiance. In every home, in every colony, the word spread like a heartbeat. Fight. The silence before the storm stretched long. The galaxy watched. Other civilizations trembled, certain that humanity would be crushed as so many before them had been. But they underestimated what humans carried. Not just weapons, not just ships, but something harder to kill. They carried memory. The memory of every hardship endured, every scar survived. They carried love, for families, for friends, for a fragile blue world that was all they had. And above all, they carried the unshakable belief that even the smallest voice, when shouted with all its strength, could be heard in the darkness. The Defiant carriers stood waiting in the void, silent shadows against the stars. Their launch would come soon. The Coalition thought they would break humanity with fear, but they did not understand the truth. Humanity had lived with fear since the beginning of time. And every time humanity had risen, the storm was coming. The sky was heavy. The galaxy held its breath, and in that silence the carriers prepared to roar. The alien coalition had no equal. Across the galaxy their name alone carried terror. To some they were a storm, to others a plague. Wherever their fleets traveled, light went out, and silence replaced voices. Worlds that had sung with life became cold graveyards drifting in the dark. No one dared resist them for long. No one, until humanity. The gathering of the Coalition's Armada was a sight no words could truly capture. Over 100,000 warships built by dozens of alien species converged like predators circling prey. They filled the void with wings of steel, their engines like suns, their weapons charged and ready. From afar, the fleet looked like a dark sea swallowing the stars, stretching farther than human eyes could measure. For the Coalition commanders, this was not war. This was extermination. They had crushed empires far older and greater than humans. They had burned civilizations whose histories stretched back 1,000,000 years. And yet Earth dared to stand against them. It was almost laughable. The aliens told themselves this battle would not be a fight. It would be a lesson. A warning to anyone else in the galaxy who might dream of resistance. The alien admirals mocked the Defiant-class carriers before they even saw them. Too heavy, they laughed. Too slow, too crude. They saw human technology as clumsy imitations of real craft, rough and unsophisticated. To them, humans were nothing but stubborn children holding sticks against beasts with claws. The Coalition's confidence was not arrogance alone. It was history. Never before had a lesser race survived their wrath, but history had not met humanity yet. Far across the void, the human colonies received fractured news of the gathering storm. Reports of fleets larger than anything humanity had ever imagined spread across channels. Panic grew. In distant mining outposts, workers whispered about the black tide of warships already moving. On Earth, every new broadcast about the Coalition's numbers struck like a knife of dread. Families clutched each other tighter. Soldiers stared into the night sky, knowing death was rushing closer each hour. And yet, beneath the fear, something stubborn burned. The Defiant carriers were nearly ready. Their massive hulls stood like mountains above their shipyards, silent giants waiting to wake. Engineers worked without sleep, knowing they were building humanity's last shield. Pilots trained in endless simulations, flying until their hands trembled, because they knew soon the simulations would turn into fire and death. The carriers themselves were different from anything the Coalition had ever seen. They were not sleek. They were not graceful. They were not made for beauty. They were made for survival. Every inch of their hull was armor, every corridor filled with supplies, every chamber designed for war. Inside, entire wings of fighters slept in their bays, waiting for the signal to launch. To the humans who walked their decks, these ships were not machines. They were homes. They were fortresses. They were hope given form. Still, the size of the enemy weighed heavily on every human heart. A single Coalition fleet was already larger than humanity's entire navy. But this was not a fleet, it was all of them gathered together. The largest armada in history, aimed at one fragile blue planet. To resist such a storm was madness. To fight it was suicide. And yet humanity prepared to do both. The Coalition commanders never thought twice. In their eyes, humans were already dead. They spoke in war councils of how quickly Earth would burn, of how its people would beg, of how its ruins would serve as a reminder to the rest of the galaxy. To them it was already written. Victory was theirs before the first shot. But they did not see what humans carried inside. They did not see the determination that had carried humanity through every trial since they first looked at the stars. They did not see the fire that grows when all hope seems lost. As the Armada gathered, the galaxy watched in silence. Neighboring worlds that had once fallen to the Coalition whispered prayers for humanity, though none believed they would last. Even those who admired the human spirit shook their heads sadly. What could a young species do against such power? What could a handful of carriers do against an ocean of ships? And yet, in the darkest corners of human space, hope refused to die. In every colony, in every city, in every home, the thought took root. We are not like the others. We will not bow. We will not vanish quietly. The Coalition Armada was almost ready. Their weapons hummed with power. Their soldiers sharpened their blades and polished their armor. Commanders gave speeches of triumph before the battle even began. To them, this was already victory. But out there in the silent shipyards, the Defiant carriers stirred. Their engines whispered alive, their decks filled with men and women ready to gamble everything. Humanity had no illusions. They knew they might fall. But they also knew one truth the Coalition could not imagine. Humanity never fought only to win. Humanity fought to endure. And sometimes endurance was more terrifying than victory. The storm was ready to break. The alien armada stretched across the stars, certain of its triumph. The carriers prepared in silence, certain only of their duty. Between them lay the void, waiting to burn. The galaxy would soon learn that numbers alone do not decide battles. And the Coalition would soon learn that fear does not always break those who face it. Sometimes it forges them. The hours before the invasion were heavy with silence. Across Earth and her colonies, people waited, holding their breath, knowing that death was rushing closer with every tick of the clock. The alien armada had finished gathering. Their fleets moved like a tide, drawing nearer and nearer, their engines blotting out the stars. Humanity's fate was nearly at hand. In this silence, the governments of Earth knew there was only one thing left to do. Words could not stop the Coalition. Promises could not save them. But words could still give strength to a people who felt the shadow of extinction pressing down on their chests. The world waited for someone to speak, and when the voice came, it carried into every home, every ship, every heart. The leader of Earth appeared on every screen. She was not dressed in finery. She wore no crown, no armor of gold. Her face showed lines of sleepless nights, her eyes red from sorrow, but her voice carried a steel that could not be broken. She looked not like a ruler standing above her people, but like a mother, a soldier, and a witness to history. Her words began softly, almost like a whisper. We are not the strongest. We are not the oldest. We are not the most powerful. But we are human, and that has always been enough. The people listened in silence. Families in crowded city apartments leaned toward glowing screens. Miners in cold space stations stopped their work, faces covered in sweat and dust. Soldiers aboard carriers stood still, helmets in their hands, eyes fixed on the woman speaking. She was speaking for all of them. The Coalition believes they will break us with fear, she said, her voice growing stronger, steadier with every word. But fear has been with us since the first fire burned in the night. We feared the dark, the cold, the storm, the beast with teeth, and every time we endured. Fear did not kill us then, and it will not kill us now. Her words spread like a tide. Men and women clutched each other's hands tighter. Children, who did not understand war, felt the power in her tone and found themselves less afraid. Soldiers who knew too well the cost of battle straightened their backs and breathed a little deeper. The aliens believe we will beg. They believe we will kneel. They believe Earth will fall as all the others have fallen, but they do not understand us. We are not fighting for thrones. We are not fighting for conquest. We fight for home, for family, for the right to stand beneath our own sky. And when humans fight for what they love, there is nothing in the universe more dangerous. Tears fell quietly in countless homes. On distant colonies, people wrote her words on walls and doors. On the carriers, pilots touched the photographs tucked inside their cockpits, whispering to themselves, I fight for you. I will not promise survival, she said at last, her voice trembling but never breaking. I will not promise victory, but I will promise this: we will not go quietly. If we fall standing. If we burn, the stars themselves will remember our fire. We are human, and that will never be erased. The broadcast ended not with a cheer, but with silence. It was not the silence of fear this time, it was the silence of resolve. The silence of a people who knew the cost and chose to pay it anyway. In the cities of Earth, families gathered around tables, speaking softly, sharing one last meal, one last laugh, one last prayer. Soldiers prepared themselves for battles they might never return from, writing final letters, locking them away, hoping someone would carry their words back if they did not come home. In the carriers, young pilots sat in their fighters, whispering names to themselves like a shield against the coming storm. The aliens laughed when they heard the broadcast. They called it the noise of desperation. They mocked the trembling voice of a fragile leader. To them, these words were meaningless against the weight of their weapons. But deep in the hearts of humans, those words had planted something no weapon could burn away. They had planted defiance. The last broadcast became more than words. It became a promise. A promise that when the storm came, humanity would not bow its head. They would scream into the darkness, even if it was their last breath. And so, when the alien armada moved closer, filling the sky with their endless fleets, humanity did not wait in silence anymore. They waited in readiness. Their fear was still there, heavy and real, but it no longer ruled them. Something else had taken its place. Something fiercer: hope. The last broadcast had given it to them, and when the first alien cannons lit the void, that hope would carry them into the fire. The moment finally came. The coalition armada surged forward, its endless warships forming a wall of steel and fire that stretched across the heavens. The void lit with their weapons, lines of burning energy sweeping through the darkness. It was like watching the night sky itself tear apart. For the humans waiting in their carriers, the first moments were unbearable. Every soldier, every pilot, every child hiding on Earth below knew the storm had begun. The noise of alarms echoed through the massive halls of the Defiant-class carriers. Engineers shouted as systems came alive. Pilots strapped themselves into cockpits, hearts pounding like drums. The fear was sharp, heavy, but so was the resolve. The alien fleets opened fire without hesitation. Their cannons unleashed waves of destruction that could level cities. The first human escorts, frigates and cruisers guarding the carriers, were torn apart instantly. Explosions scattered across the void like red flowers blooming in the dark. Entire crews vanished in silence, their ships shattered before they could even fire back. Still, the carriers held their ground. Their shields glowed under the constant strikes, their massive hulls trembling but refusing to fall. Inside, crew members gripped their stations as the metal around them groaned like a wounded beast. The coalition commanders sneered. To them it was proof of weakness, humans hiding behind floating fortresses, waiting to die. And then the carriers opened from their vast bays. Thousands of small doors lit up like stars, and the fighters poured out, sleek, fast, alive with human hands at their controls. They launched in swarms, spreading like sparks from a fire, filling the void with wings of light. Each pilot carried more than missiles and guns. They carried names, memories, and promises. They fought not as machines, but as people. The alien fleets were ready for fighters. They had destroyed countless swarms before, but these were different. Human pilots flew with desperation no program could match. They twisted through impossible maneuvers, dove through enemy fire, and struck at weak points with uncanny precision. A cruiser would expect a safe distance, only to find a human fighter screaming straight through its defenses, leaving explosions in its wake. For every fighter lost, two more seemed to take its place, driven by the same fury. Alien commanders began to notice something unnerving. Humans did not break formation when losses mounted. They did not retreat when the enemy's fire thickened. They fought like each second was borrowed time, and they would spend it without hesitation. The carriers themselves unleashed their power. Massive rail cannons fired bolts of tungsten that tore through the shields of alien battleships like paper. Missile bays opened, sending storms of fire into the void. Each impact was a reminder that humanity had prepared for this day, and they had not come empty-handed. Still, the battle was brutal. Human ships burned one after another. Pilots screamed final words before their comms went silent. Entire squadrons vanished in explosions that lit the void like dying stars. The coalition pressed hard, throwing wave after wave at the defenders. They believed humanity would collapse soon, crushed by sheer numbers. But humanity did not collapse. On the deck of one carrier, a young pilot whispered his daughter's name before diving straight into the engines of an alien destroyer. His sacrifice shattered the vessel, sending its wreckage spinning into others. On another ship, engineers refused to abandon their posts as fire spread, holding the shields just long enough for fighters to return. Each act of courage bled into the next, weaving a tapestry of defiance. The alien Armada had expected fear. Instead, they saw fury. Instead of broken spirits, they saw burning eyes. For the first time, some alien captains hesitated, staring at the human swarms that refused to fade. They had fought empires with bigger fleets, with sharper weapons, with stronger ships. But they had never fought like this. The void became a storm of fire. Carriers roared, fighters danced, and alien warships fell one by one, their deaths lighting the night. Humanity was bleeding, yes, but they were also striking back. The balance was not yet broken, but for the first time the coalition felt something strange. Doubt. The humans were supposed to be crushed by now. Instead, their carriers still stood, their fighters still flew, and their voices still echoed across the comms. For Earth. For family. For humanity. The first clash was not the end of the war. It was only the beginning. But in that beginning, something new was born in the galaxy. The aliens had seen many enemies. They had destroyed many civilizations. But never before had they seen a species so ready to fight until the last breath. The fire in the void burned on, and with it the legend of humanity began to grow. The battle raged on, and the void was thick with fire and wreckage. Alien warships pressed forward without mercy, their endless lines of cannons tearing through human escorts. Fighters still swarmed, but their numbers thinned with every passing minute. Pilots who had sworn to return home were now only names on silent comms, their ships burning into dust. Inside the Defiant carriers, the halls shook under every impact. Crew members held onto rails as consoles sparked and alarms screamed. The air grew heavy with smoke and fear. Still, no one abandoned their stations. They all knew what was at stake. They were not only fighting for survival, they were fighting to prove that humanity's voice would not be erased from the galaxy. But the coalition did not stop. They had grown frustrated by the resistance, and frustration made them cruel. Flagships at the center of their armada unleashed their greatest weapons. Enormous cannons forged to crush planets turned toward the carriers. With each shot, stars seemed to die. Blazing beams of energy struck the shields of the Defiant ships, cutting through layer after layer. Whole sections of armor melted away. Decks crumbled. People screamed as fire swept through compartments. One carrier buckled under the force, its massive hull splitting apart like a broken heart. Thousands of souls inside vanished in an instant, their sacrifice swallowed by the dark. A silence followed that loss, a silence filled with grief but also with rage. The remaining carriers groaned but did not fall. Their crews, battered and bleeding, fought to keep systems online. Engineers worked with burned hands, refusing to leave their posts. Medics stitched wounds in corridors lit by flickering lights. Pilots returned to their bays with trembling hands, only to launch again into the storm. Humanity was breaking, but they were breaking forward. And deep within the cores of the surviving carriers, a secret waited. Humanity's greatest gamble. For years, hidden in silence, Earth had prepared weapons not meant for conquest but for survival. They were born of desperation, designed in the shadows, tested in secret places where no alien spies could see. Even many crew members did not know they existed. The coalition believed the carriers were simply floating fortresses, massive shields with endless fighters. They were wrong. On the command deck of the lead carrier, the admiral stood with his jaw tight. He knew the time had come. The battle could not be won with fighters alone. The enemy had too many ships, too much firepower. If humanity wanted to survive, they had to reveal their last card. He gave the order, his voice calm despite the storm. Arm the cores. Across the carriers, hidden chambers unlocked. Doors sealed. Power rerouted. The very ships trembled as their secret hearts awakened. Within them lay humanity's most dangerous invention. Massive energy lances and fusion warheads. Weapons that could cut through even the strongest alien shields. They had been held back until now for one moment only. The breaking point. As the alien fleet pressed closer, their commanders sneering at the trembling carriers, humanity unleashed its fury. From the belly of the Defiant ships, beams of pure light tore into the void. They were brighter than suns, hotter than anything the coalition had ever faced. Alien flagships, so proud and untouchable, were pierced straight through, their mighty hulls splitting like paper. Shockwaves tore across the battlefield as warheads detonated, wiping out entire formations in bursts of fire. The aliens screamed in confusion and terror. This was not the battle they had planned. They had come expecting an easy kill, not hidden weapons powerful enough to tear their armada apart. For the first time they hesitated. For the first time they doubted. Humanity had shown its teeth, but the cost was terrible. Every time the carriers fired their secret weapons, their own systems strained near breaking. Hulls cracked. Reactors overheated. Crew members gave everything to keep the machines alive long enough to fire again. The carriers were bleeding as much as the enemy, but they refused to stop. One carrier, already burning, launched its last barrage before collapsing in silence. Its wreckage floated through the void like a tomb, but its final strike had taken 3 alien destroyers with it. The humans aboard had died with their hands still on their weapons, their defiance blazing even in death. The coalition armada was shaken. Their endless formation had cracks now wide and spreading. Their captains, once so certain, shouted in panic as more ships vanished under the storm of human fire. They had never faced an enemy willing to burn itself to strike harder. They had never seen such madness. The breaking point had arrived, but it was not humanity that broke. It was the coalition. In the chaos, human voices still carried over comms, ragged and tired but fierce. For Earth, they cried. For the fallen! Every word struck deeper than any weapon, because it came from hearts that refused to yield. The void was a graveyard now, filled with wreckage and fire. Both sides bled. Both sides had lost more than they could count. But when the smoke cleared, the coalition no longer saw weak humans clinging to survival. They saw something else, something they had never expected. A species that could not be broken even when standing at the edge of extinction. And in that moment, the coalition began to fear. The battle should have been finished. By every law of war, by every calculation of numbers, humanity should have been nothing more than smoke and ash. The coalition had brought its entire armada, more ships than any single species had ever faced. They had super weapons designed to shatter worlds. They had fleets stretching from horizon to horizon. They had certainty, but certainty had cracked. The Defiant carriers still stood. Scarred, burning, groaning under the strain, but still alive. And more than that, they were fighting back. For every human ship destroyed, for every fighter lost, the carriers struck harder. It was madness in the eyes of the aliens. Madness that turned into terror. The coalition had fought many wars. They had faced enemies that resisted for a while, then begged for mercy. They had seen broken armies throw down their weapons. They had seen planets burn without a single cry of defiance. But this was different. Humanity did not break. Humanity did not kneel. Humanity fought as if death was not something to fear, but something to embrace if it meant striking one more blow. Alien commanders shouted across channels, their voices shaking. Reports poured in. Flagships destroyed, entire squadrons lost, formations broken by human weapons no one had expected. For the first time in centuries, the coalition's admirals argued with each other in fear. Some demanded retreat, others screamed for more firepower. None of them could hide the truth. They were afraid. And fear spread faster than fire. Alien soldiers on smaller ships looked at their screens and saw human fighters diving at them with no hesitation, even when outnumbered 10-1. They saw pilots crash their burning craft into cruisers just to take the enemy down with them. They saw carriers still firing, even as half their decks were destroyed. It was not strategy alone. It was not strength. It was will. And that will frightened them more than any weapon. In the heart of the battle, a human carrier took a direct hit that tore through 3 decks. Fire erupted across its hull. Entire sections vented into the void, bodies drifting silently. Any other species would have abandoned the ship, declared it lost. But humans did not. Crews sealed the breaches with their own hands, welding plates in burning corridors while medics dragged the wounded to safety. Pilots launched again from cracked bays, their ships battered, their faces streaked with tears and soot. The coalition watched in horror as that same carrier, scarred and broken, turned and fired one more barrage that ripped a battleship apart. The message was clear. Humanity did not die quietly. On alien command bridges, silence began to grow. Officers who once sneered now stared at their screens with wide eyes. They had thought of humans as fragile, soft creatures from a small planet. Now they saw something they could not explain. These creatures bled and burned, yet they kept fighting. Their defiance was not natural. It was something deeper, something terrifying. For the first time, whispers began to spread among the alien crews. What if they cannot be stopped? What if this is only the beginning? What if the humans are different? Fear, once planted, took root quickly. The coalition armada was vast, but even vast armies can crumble when their hearts are shaken, and humanity had struck at the heart. Meanwhile, the humans themselves knew the cost. The carriers were dying. Fighters were being lost faster than they could launch. Entire fleets of escorts had already vanished into wreckage. But no one stopped. No one gave in. They carried the words of the last broadcast in their hearts. If we fall standing. And standing they fought. An alien destroyer broke formation, its crew abandoning the fight in panic. Then another followed. Soon entire groups of ships hesitated, afraid to push closer to the carriers. The admirals roared, ordering them back into the line, but fear cannot always be commanded away. They had looked into the eyes of humanity and seen something that did not belong to prey. They had seen predators. The galaxy had called humans fragile, but fragility can hide something stronger than steel. Fragility makes one cling harder, fight harder, survive longer. And the aliens realized too late what that meant. They had come expecting an easy victory. Instead, they had awakened a nightmare. The void was filled with the sound of human voices shouting through static-filled comms. Hold the line. For Earth. We are still here. Each cry was another blow to the coalition's spirit. Each cry reminded them that humans were not simply fighting to live. They were fighting to make sure the galaxy never forgot them, and the galaxy would not forget. The coalition armada, mighty and unstoppable, had begun to break, not from weapons, not from numbers, but from fear. Terror now belonged not to humanity, but to the victors who had thought themselves untouchable. The humans had turned the tide, but the battle was not yet over. The battle ended not with triumphal horns, but with silence. A silence heavy and vast, broken only by the faint hiss of damaged comms and the distant crackle of burning wreckage drifting through the void. The coalition armada, once so certain of its power, had shattered. Great battleships lay broken, their hulks spinning endlessly. Destroyers floated like corpses in orbit. Entire fleets had fled, abandoning their victory in terror, and in the center of that graveyard stood the Defiant carriers. They were no longer proud, gleaming warships. They were scarred, wounded giants. Their hulls were torn open in places, their decks scorched. Fires still burned in corridors where oxygen stubbornly clung. Thousands of humans had given their lives and their bodies drifted quietly into the darkness of space. Yet the carriers still lived. And because they lived, humanity still had a voice. Inside one carrier, medics moved through smoke-filled halls, dragging survivors to makeshift infirmaries. Children born on board, little ones who had never seen Earth with their own eyes, held on to their mothers as alarms still echoed. Pilots staggered out of their cockpits bleeding and exhausted, whispering to themselves, "We held. We did not fall." Across the comm channels, a single message began to spread, soft and trembling, but growing stronger as more voices joined. "We are still here." It was not a cry of victory. It was a statement of survival. The coalition had expected silence, but instead the galaxy heard humanity speak again, and that sound shook stars. On alien worlds, broadcasts of the battle reached homes and stations. Civilians who had never questioned their empire now sat in stunned silence. They saw the carriers standing when no ship should have. They saw humans bleeding but refusing to kneel. Fear turned into doubt. Doubt turned into whispers. And whispers would one day turn into rebellion. The coalition leaders raged, but even they could not erase what had happened. Their armada had not only been beaten, it had been broken by those they thought weak. The humans had lit a fire no fleet could extinguish, yet humanity did not celebrate. In the carrier's dark halls there was mourning. Families wept for the fathers, mothers, brothers, and sisters who would never return. Names were read aloud in trembling voices, each name echoing like a drumbeat of sacrifice. Soldiers stood at attention even with bandaged limbs, tears running down their soot-stained faces. But through the grief, there was pride. Pride that their deaths had meant something. Pride that the galaxy would remember. Captain Reyes, standing on the ruined bridge of the Valiant Dawn, looked out at the wreckage. Her hands trembled on the railing, but her voice was steady when she spoke to her crew. "They thought us fragile. They thought us weak. But look around you. The enemy has fled and we still remain. Let this be a promise to our fallen, to our children, to our Earth. Humanity will not bow. Humanity will rise." Her words carried beyond her ship. They carried across all the carriers, across what remained of the human fleet. The battered survivors straightened their backs. They were no longer just soldiers. They were symbols. Symbols of defiance. Symbols of hope. And the galaxy was listening. The Defiant carriers became more than ships. They became legends. Even as they drifted in silence, even as they limped home scarred, their very existence spoke louder than any broadcast. They had stood against the Armada, and the Armada had broken. The coalition, once terrifying, now feared shadows. Admirals slept with dread, wondering when humans would strike again. Politicians whispered that the war might never be won. Soldiers once eager for glory hesitated when they heard the name human. The terror had shifted. It would not end the war. Humanity still had long years ahead, still had battles to fight, still had wounds to heal, but something had changed forever. No longer would humanity be seen as prey. As the carriers sailed into the dark, damaged but unbroken, the stars bore witness to something eternal. In every scar, in every broken hull, in every whispered name of the fallen, there was a story written. A story of a people who refused to vanish. And in that story was a warning. To those who thought themselves masters of the galaxy, humanity's survival spoke with quiet, unyielding power. We are still here, and we are not afraid.